And sure enough, two guys walk right into my cell. One has an enormous swastika tattooed on his neck. It takes up the entire front half of his neck. And the other guy has FU tattooed on his eyelids. I figured they were here to give me a beat down. I jumped up out of my bed and I put up my dukes.
What happens when After Prison Show turns from its normal, usual, crazy self and turns a little more serious? That's right, things are a lot more serious right now today because we are actually doing another stellar interview. And this isn't just an interview like I normally do, because this is actually probably the biggest interview that we have ever done here on After Prison Show. And that is because I am here with Mr. John Kiriakou. I pronounced that correctly,
You
right?
did indeed.
Greatly appreciate having you here on After Prison Show.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about it.
I really think the audience is really going to be intrigued and also highly entertained by your overall story. There is one thing that I do have to say going into this, and that is there are a lot of questions that I really would like to ask you, but unfortunately, because this is YouTube, we just can't ask those questions. If people would like to know more about your actual story, your background, the crazy things that we can't talk about here, where could they find those at?
I've got a website. It's www.johnkiriakou.com.
And I'm also going to include links in the descriptions where you can go find books written by Mr. John Kiriakou right here. Mr. Kiriakou, is it okay if I call you Mr.?
You can call me John.
Okay. John here is a former CIA agent. This man also went to prison and served 2 years as well. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of this man's case because I assure you it is very crazy. And again, if you would like to find out anything more about that, please check the links down in the descriptions for all of that information. What I do want to focus on with you, John, in this interview is what it was like for a man who had no prior experience being locked up at all and then actually going to prison to have to serve 2 years. But I want to talk about exactly what it was like for you going to prison. After you received your sentence, you were sentenced to 2 years and you were supposed to serve your time at a facility in the federal system, mind you, not in the state system like where I served time at. State and federal system is completely different. But you were actually supposed to serve your time at a low-level institution.
A minimum, actually. When I was sentenced to 30 months, which meant a maximum of 23 months. So my attorneys asked the judge to assign me to a minimum security work camp. The prosecutors agreed right then and there while we were standing there. And the judge agreed, minimum security work camp, and she bangs her gavel. So my attorneys told me, well, you know, with a minimum security camp, you can work in town, there are no bars on the windows, you're free to come and go as you please, you're just on your honor to not abscond and run away or bring in contraband or whatever. But, you know, it'll be a quick 2 years. I said, okay, that's not so bad. I have 5 kids, I'm gonna miss my kids, my wife, my house, but I can handle it. So I got to the prison, turned myself in, my lawyer and some friends and a cousin of mine, they all drove me up, and what you do when you self-surrender, you just literally knock on the door and say, hi, I'm John Kiriakou, I'm here to turn myself in. And so they put me through the metal detector and they pat me down, and then the cop starts walking me around to the back of the prison. Now there's the work camp, and then across the street is the actual prison with the double fences and the concertina wire and, you know, everything you see on MSNBC at 11 o'clock at night.
Right, so this is a major institution.
Major institution. In fact, when we pulled into the parking lot, I saw the water tower first, and then I saw the walls, and I said, oh my God, this is an actual prison. I just assumed it was just a standalone camp. So he starts walking me around to the back of the prison. And I said, no, I'm supposed to be at the camp across the street. And he kind of chuckles or chortles. And he goes, not according to my paperwork, you're not.
So they completely mess up your paperwork. How do you feel about that situation in general? Like, was that just a mistake?
Oh, no, I'm absolutely convinced that it was done on purpose. I learned later that in the federal system, the judge can only make a recommendation of where you should go. And that the Justice Department, from the very beginning, had no intentions whatsoever of letting me ride this out in a minimum security work camp.
That's unbelievable. Given the circumstances behind your actual case, I'm sure that played heavily into how your paperwork magically got messed up and you end up,
Oh yeah.
from supposedly having to serve time at an institution like possibly where Martha Stewart was,
Right.
now you're at an actual major USP.
Oh, with murderers and drug kingpins and child sex predators, and this was like the worst of the worst. You know what I ended up doing? I ended up filing a Freedom of Information Act request on myself, just to see what was the process by which they changed their minds and put me in this thing. I got like 220 pages back. Almost all of it was just nonsense. It was my visitors list, it was my medical records, worthless information. But there were 8 pages that they included in this FOIA release that were clearly stamped at the top and the bottom, FOIA exempt, do not release to inmate. And I think somebody felt sorry for me and included it with all this other stuff. And it was funny, in these huge block letters, it says, caution, inmate has access to the media. And that's why they put me in the actual prison, because they thought that that would cut me off from the media. In fact, all it did was it made me more determined.
Now, this is kind of completely off topic, but it is a question that I do want to ask. As somebody who has never been locked up before, you find out that you're being sentenced to 2 years in prison and that you are supposedly being sent to a low-level institution, a minimum with no fences around it. Did running ever cross your mind at all? Did you ever just...
Oh, I think every prisoner fantasizes constantly about how to get the heck out. I mean, like anybody else in the prison, I would be sitting in the yard, and the yard sort of overlooked the back gate to the prison. And I watched every single time a delivery would come in or the garbage truck would come in. Every single time I paid intense attention to sort of the MO of how this was done. And I came to the conclusion that everybody else came to, that it's virtually impossible to escape from prison unless you have help on the inside.
Right. Are you a fan of any kind of prison TV shows at all?
I watch them all, which drives my wife crazy. So isn't this depressing to you? No, it's fascinating to
Absolutely. I find it the same exact way as well. But I'm just curious, have you ever seen Prison Break?
Oh, sure.
So, you know, according to Prison Break, nothing is impossible.
Yeah, and in Prison Break, you can actually break back into the prison.
It's the most insane thing in the world, but you're absolutely right what you mentioned with, if you do have help from the inside, I guess it would be possible. With 2 years like you had, with 7 years like I had, you know, you are getting another chance at life, so it's really not something that you should really entertain too deeply. But
that's right.
I just wanted to ask you about that. So upon first getting to prison, we know you were supposed to be sent to a minimum security facility, end up going to a major USP, a United States penitentiary. What were your first encounters after realizing, oh my God, I'm at a completely different place than where I thought I was going to be? Talk about some of the first encounters you experienced, some of the first things that you actually remember about walking into this prison.
Well, the first thing I told myself was, take it easy. You can't flip out. You'll end up in solitary. There's nothing you can do. So that's what I did. I remember being like, even to myself, surprisingly calm. So I followed the cop into this outbuilding where they process prisoners. And so he takes a picture from my ID. He throws me a pair of 6XL pants that I spent the first 3 days having to hold up with one hand.
Yeah, they always give you the worst size clothing. Either way too small or way too big. I think they do that on purpose.
I think they do. Yeah, just to humiliate you.
Absolutely.
And so I figured, when I finally get access to a phone, I'll call my attorney, get this whole thing straightened out. In fact, the attorney said, wow, like 5 days later, I finally got access to the phone. The attorney said, oh, I'm so sorry this happened. We could file a motion, but it'll take 2 years before we get a hearing and you'll be home by then. He said, I'm sorry, man, you're just gonna have to tough it out.
That's insane.
It was awful. But that first day, the only thing the cop said to me, besides ordering me, you know, stand up, sit down, go over there, sit over there, he said, a point of advice, he said, if somebody comes into your cell uninvited, that's an act of aggression. And I thought, great, I've been in prison 40 minutes and I'm gonna have to fight somebody. So I get my clothes. He gives me a towel and whatever else, a pair of socks, a pair of flip-flops. I go to my cell, introduce myself to my cellmates, and I took a nap. So I wake up an hour later, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and sure enough, two guys walk right into my cell. One has an enormous swastika tattooed on his neck. It takes up the entire front half of his neck. And the other guy has F-U tattooed on his eyelids, which had to be crazy painful.
He had what? You can actually say it.
I can say it. He had "fuck you" tattooed on his eyelids. So every time he blinked,
that's what it said.
yeah,
fuck you.
It was crazy.
So what were your thoughts as soon as these guys come into your cell?
I figured they were here to give me a beat down.
And how did you react? Were you scared?
I jumped up out of my bed or off the edge of my bed. I put up my dukes. You know, I had been pretty highly trained in my government career.
Yeah.
But at that point, I'm 49 years old. These guys are in their 20s. I figured, you know, I'm going to do my best, but they're gonna wallop me.
They were big guys?
They were big guys. One was about 6'4". He was skinny, but he was 6'4". The other guy was short and fat. But I figured it's two of them, it's one of me, and my other cellmates who were all foreigners walked out of the cell as soon as these guys walked in. So they walk into my cell, and I put my dukes up, and I said, "What do you want?" And one of them says, "Are you the new guy?" He goes, "Take it easy. Are you the new guy?" I go, "Yeah, what do you want?" He says, "Are you a fag?" I said, "No, I'm not a fag." "Are you a rat?" I said, "No, I didn't have anybody in my case. I'm not a rat." "Are you a
sex offender?
Sex offender, a child sex offender?" I said, "No, of course not." And he says, "Okay, if you can give us your paperwork, you can sit at the Aryan table in the cafeteria." And I go, "Oh, okay."
A lot of times when newcomers come to a prison, they are absolutely required to produce their paperwork, which actually states what they're locked up for. And this was an encounter that you were having with that exact thing.
And I had never heard of this kind of thing. But afterwards, people were telling me, "Oh yeah, this is normal. This is a good thing. This is a good thing. You're going to be at the good table." The good table was guys who were not rats and guys who were not in on sex crimes.
But it was a gang nonetheless that you were going to be seated with the Aryans.
Right. And this is another thing that I realized early on. And again, it had never occurred to me. But everything, literally everything in prison life is so factionalized. Whether you consider yourself to be part of a gang or associated with a gang or not at all associated with a gang, you're going to be identified as being with a gang, whether you like it or not. And so for that very first year, I was with the Aryans. Now, I made friends with a guy across the hall from me who was a senior captain in a five families major mafia family. And I would finish my newspaper, I'd give it to him. He'd finish his newspaper and give it to me. We'd trade books, we'd walk on the yard together. So finally, after about a year, he said to me, "Let me ask you something." He goes, "How come you sit with those Nazi retards at the front table?"
Nazi retards?
That's what he said. Those Nazi retards. I said, "I don't know. My first day here, they told me to sit with them." And very dramatically, he says, "From today, you're with the Italians."
So with you having to provide your paperwork stating what you were locked up for, you were a government agent. And I just wonder if at any time you were actually perceived as being like a cop or anything like that when they actually saw what you were locked up for.
That was actually my greatest fear. My single greatest fear was that people would think I was some kind of a federal cop, which I was not. I was very, very lucky though in the respect that an Italian guy who became my best friend in prison, and an old school 78-year-old cat burglar with whom I also became friends, took an interest in my case. They had followed it in the New York Times, and they saw in the Sunday Times 4 days before I arrived that I had been assigned to that prison. They took it upon themselves, just because they're really great guys, to go around to everybody who mattered in that prison, the Aryans, the Italians, and to explain to them the difference between what I did and what an FBI agent does. I had no powers of arrest. I didn't carry a gun. I didn't carry a badge. I was overseas working to protect the country and keep the country safe. So once those guys understood that I was not a cop, I didn't have any problems at all.
You know, and that's something else interesting that you mentioned as well, talking about really good guys who were locked up. With the fact that you never were locked up in the past, you probably had a preconceived notion going into it that you were going to be surrounded by basically nothing but bad guys. Getting to prison, were your thoughts at all changed? I mean, obviously they were. I'm sure you met people who were actually decent individuals.
Oh, listen, you know, there's this old saying that you don't go to prison to make friends, right? I remembered reading an interview with a congressman from Ohio who went bad and did 2 years in a federal prison. And when he came out, he said in an interview that he made some of the best friends of his life in prison. Well, I went into prison saying, I don't want any new friends. I don't need any new friends. I'm going to do my time and go home. In fact, I made some great friends, really great guys. You know, I can say with confidence that there are a lot of guys in prison who don't belong in prison. For example, why do we even have minimum security work camps? If your crime was so minor that they're going to put you in a place that doesn't even have bars on the windows and where you're free to come and go as you please, why be in prison at all? Why aren't you at home? Even house arrest, call it house arrest, but so at least you can work and support your family.
Let's talk about some of the gangs that were in the prison. I'm sure you saw quite a lot of different gangs.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what gangs may have held the most power, some violent encounters you possibly saw with the gangs there?
The most important and powerful gang was called the Real slowly, he gets up out of his chair, walks over to Cat in the Hat, and he beat this guy into a coma. There was blood all over the floor. Everybody scatters.
Let's talk about some of the gangs that were in the prison. I'm sure you saw quite a lot of different gangs.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what gangs may have held the most power, some violent encounters you possibly saw with the gangs there?
The most important and powerful gang was called Pisces, and it's a uniquely prison gang. So Pisces is literally every Hispanic in the prison. You could be a member of the Mexican Mafia, the Latin Kings, the Borrachos, the Norteños, the MS-13. You're still a member of Pisces.
Just because you're Hispanic.
Just because you're Hispanic. And they're really serious about this, where they have mandatory workouts every day. Every day you have to lift weights. Every day you have to do calisthenics. And every single Hispanic has to play soccer. And that's so in the event of a race riot.
They're ready.
They're ready.
And they're trained.
And they are. So within the Pisces, you have these different subgroups, these different gangs. We had Bloods and Crips, mostly Bloods, but we had some Crips too. And then their two shot callers had an overall black shot caller who kept the peace. And then among the whites, we had the Aryan Brotherhood. We had the Odinists that prayed to the Norse god Odin. And then the Italians. Now the Italians were by far the smallest group, but by far the most highly respected.
Why was that?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I will say one of the things I learned very early on about the Italians is that they're the most honorable people in the prison. They don't steal from anybody. They don't go behind anybody's back. What you see is what you get. They're true to their word, and they're very honorable people.
I don't know anything about the Italians. I've never had any experience with them being locked up because they are, for the most part, going to be in the federal system. But my assumption of what the Italians would be like in there would be relatively older guys. Is that what it is?
There was almost no middle. There was the older guys. We had the boss of the Gambino family. We had the underboss of the Bonanno family. We had the boss of the De Cavalcante family. I mean, these are serious, high-level. We had two captains from the Bruno Testa family in Philadelphia. These are high-level guys. Then there's nobody in the middle. And then you have a whole bunch of low-level guys. So altogether, there were only probably a dozen and a half genuine Italians in prison, but they commanded great respect.
Let's talk about some violent encounters you saw involving gang activity.
There was one major event about 6 weeks before I got there. It was a black Hispanic really it was a riot, to the point where they went into lockdown for several weeks. It was a couple of black guys who had somehow disrespected the Hispanics. The Hispanics waited for days until these guys were out on the yard, and then they got bocce balls to beat them, to bash their heads in with bocce balls. You know what hard, dense wood bocce balls are made out of. Baseball bats. It got so bad that they had to land a helicopter on the yard to life-flight a couple of these guys to Pittsburgh. So there was nothing like that once I got there. It was still tense when I arrived. And to make matters worse, a guard in a nearby prison had been murdered the day before I arrived. And so when I arrived at Loretto, we were on lockdown for the first week. So I didn't see the major race riots. What I saw was mostly fights about what to watch on TV. And then there was one bloody fight between an Aryan and a rat. And I was shocked when the rat took this guy down. And this was a great, big, strong Aryan who's working out constantly and running the track. And I guess this rat just figured he had nothing to lose, and he fought as if his life truly depended on it. There was one incident in my TV room in Central Unit which I instigated, and I was happy to do it. There were two prisoners. I mentioned to you briefly the Cat in the Hat a few minutes ago. This was a bad guy. This was a guy who was in on a murder for hire. And what happened in his case was that he owed the mafia $100,000 in gambling debts. He couldn't pay it. So what he did, because he's a moron, is he took out a $100,000 life insurance policy on his business partner and best friend, and hired a hitman. The hitman flew up from New Orleans. The guy picked him up, the Cat in the Hat picked him up at the airport, gave him the gun, drove him to the partner's house. The guy goes into the house, kills the partner. Cat in the Hat takes him back to Pittsburgh airport, keeps the gun. And then he calls the insurance company. He doesn't even call cops. He calls the insurance company and says, "Oh, my partner's dead, so I need to collect on this $100,000 life insurance policy." 2 hours later, he's under arrest. So they arrest the hitman as well. Well, much to everybody's surprise, the hitman doesn't say a word, but Cat in the Hat just rats out the hitman and confesses to the whole thing. So the deal was Cat in the Hat would get 20 if he testified against the hitman. They were seeking the death penalty against the hitman. He agreed. He rats the guy out. But in the course of the trial, the hitman dies of a heart attack in jail. Well, the feds had to respect the deal they made with Cat in the Hat. They gave him his 20. He had done 10. When he finished his 10, he transferred to my prison for the next 10. I didn't like this guy from the get-go. I didn't like that he was a rat. I didn't like his crime. And he wanted to move into my cell because we had a good cell. I said, absolutely not. I don't like you. I don't like what you did. And I don't like your crime and your response to it. So he kind of had it out for me. Well, there was another guy we called Truck, who was a long-distance truck driver in the 1970s. To make a long story short, he had committed a series of sexual assaults along his truck route. And several of the women that he assaulted testified against him. He got 20 years in a state penitentiary in Colorado. The issue with him was, though, that along that same truck route, at the same time, women were being murdered. And so the cops thought it was him, but these were the days before DNA testing, and so they couldn't get him on those charges. But they got him on these sexual assaults. And so he did 20. Now, the state of Colorado had wanted him to spend the rest of his natural life in prison. They were upset that he only got the 20. And so they kept pushing him and nudging him and trying to force his hand when it came to his parole. They would call him in the middle of the night. They would go to his house in the middle of the night. And finally, he shoved his parole officer. Well, that's an assault and it's a parole violation. And so the parole officer called the cops to come and search the house, and they found guns. And so they got him on felon with a gun. It's a mandatory minimum of 8. He got another 20. So although they didn't get him on the crime they thought he committed, he ended up with 40 years in prison. Well, this guy was very, very violent. He would beat up his roommates all the time. And I mean, like, seriously beat them up. If they were talking too loudly, if they put the light on while he was taking a nap, they'd get a beat down. This guy, for whatever reason, actively sought my approval. I kept him at arm's length, but he was constantly trying to ingratiate himself with me. Well, I'm sitting next to him in the TV room one day, and Cat in the Hat doesn't see that I'm sitting like 4 feet away. And I had been called to the lieutenant's office earlier in the day to sign a form saying that I was agreeing to an interview with NPR. They had called that day. And so Cat in the Hat had heard that I was called to the lieutenant's office. And he says to the guy next to him, "Did you hear they called Kiriakou to the lieutenant's office? That guy's a rat." And Truck is sitting next to me, as I said. He leans over and he says, "Did you hear that? That guy called you a rat." And I thought,
this is your chance.
this is my chance. And I said to him, a couple hours ago, he called you a child molester. Truck turns and looks at me.
He ain't like that at all.
He doesn't say a word. He didn't like it one bit, right? He looks at me real slowly. He gets up out of his chair, walks over to Cat in the Hat, and he beat this guy into a coma. There was blood all over the floor. Everybody scatters, right? They all run back to their rooms because they don't want to be implicated in this. So what happened is the cops took both Truck and Cat in the Hat to solitary. Cat in the Hat for his own safety and for him to recover down in there.
He was beaten.
He was beaten senseless. I had never seen a beating like that in real life. And Truck got another assault charge. They added 2 years to his sentence, and they sent him to a medium security prison.
One major difference between the federal and state system, you being in federal prison, I was in state. When I go to prison, I'm not leaving the state of Virginia. I'm staying right here.
Right.
The federal system, though, they can send you to California,
Yes.
Alaska.
And they do that, and it's called diesel therapy. I was threatened with diesel therapy when I started writing this blog that I was calling Letters from Loretto. I had crazy success with this blog. My first one got 1 million hits because it was picked up by the Huffington Post.
Oh, wow.
And once the Huffington Post got it, it went crazy. It was on all the major news broadcasts. It was in the newspapers the day after that. By the end of the week, it was in the magazines. I was in The Economist and GQ and Playboy and the Atlantic Monthly. It was crazy. And the prison administration didn't like this kind of attention. So they started talking about diesel therapy. I never heard of diesel therapy. I didn't know what that meant. But there was one friendly administrator who came up to me and warned me, "They're talking about putting you in diesel therapy." I said, "What is that?" And what it is, as you say, Joe, the U.S. prison system is national. It's nationwide. They don't have to put you anywhere near your home or your family. They can put you anywhere they want. So what they do is they put you on a bus, which is powered by diesel, and they send you to USP Canaan, Pennsylvania, for example. That's a transportation hub. Maybe you're there for a week, maybe you're there for a month, then they send you to Harrisburg, where you catch a Conair flight to Atlanta, USP Atlanta. Maybe you're in Atlanta for a week or 2 or 4. And then they send you to Oklahoma City, which is the national transportation hub. And then maybe to Yankton, South Dakota. And maybe Lompoc, California after that. Or Tallahassee, Florida. And they keep you in transit because if you're a federal prisoner in transit, you're not allowed to have access to a phone, to the mail, or to the email system. So there's no way your family would even know what time zone you're in. You're constantly in transit, and they can do that for up to a year. Well, that's what they threatened me with. So I immediately wrote a blog. I smuggled it out. It was published again on the Huffington Post, went crazy again, viral post.
This was a blog post about the diesel therapy.
About the diesel therapy. And I said, they're threatening me with diesel therapy because I'm practicing my constitutional right to freedom of speech. So what happened was, people like Yoko Ono tweeted, "Hands off John Kiriakou." John Cusack called my wife to ask what he could do to be helpful. And he tweeted, there were 1,600 phone calls to the director of the Bureau of Prisons saying, "You better leave that guy alone." And they backed off.
That is insanity.
It was crazy. And then I learned a great piece of intelligence. It just so happened that the following weekend, my cousin came to visit me from Pittsburgh. And when he was out in the lobby waiting to come in, he heard 2 cops talking about me. One of them said, "Who's that guy coming to visit?" And the other cop said, "Kiriakou." "Oh, that guy that's writing those blogs? How come that guy's not in solitary?" And the first cop says, "I asked the warden that. And the warden said we can't put him in solitary because he hasn't used any of our names." So my cousin told me this. And I said, this is a great piece of intelligence. I realized at that moment I could write anything I wanted. I could say anything I wanted. And so long as I didn't use their names, they couldn't touch me.
So all of the blog posts are in the book. And again, I will be including links to John Kiriaku's books down in the descriptions as well. John Kiriaku's case was actually pretty high profile, which brought in a lot of attention from not only media sources, but also celebrities as well, as he was just mentioning with Yoko Ono.
Yeah, Yoko Ono was very good to me, John Cusack, Daniel Ellsberg. I got $5,000 from Roseanne Barr,
Wow.
the comedian.
I like Roseanne.
I like Roseanne. She's number one on my list. But Susan Sarandon, the Academy Award-winning actress. I mean, I've lost count the number of people who helped me out, who were supportive, who tweeted about my case to their millions of followers, who sent money from my defense fund. It was really amazing.
That is insanity. But one thing that I want to mention as well with what you were writing from prison and what I was writing as well, that was something that I also did myself, was not mention anyone's name.
Right.
So what I would actually do when I would be telling a story about some of the crazy stuff that I was experiencing, I would make up little nicknames for either the prison staff or the actual prisoners that I was in there with. You know, that way I couldn't really be held too accountable for putting someone on full display.
I did the same thing.
Did you actually have nicknames for guards or other prisoners?
Oh yeah, Horseface, Big Dummy, Spawn of Horseface. Yeah.
What do you think the worst thing about prison was?
People walked away from me in Washington, but they walked up to me in Hollywood. Just since I've been home, I've sold 3 shows to 3 different networks, one with Oliver Stone.
What do you think the worst thing about prison was?
You know, I think probably, well, I mean, you're going to miss your family, of course, but probably the boredom. I actually watched the boredom drive people crazy. People who were sort of on the line to begin with, they can't handle institutionalization. And people actually went crazy while I was there.
Losing their minds.
Yeah.
Just because they didn't have nothing to do? Or
And the guards don't care if you're crazy, and the medics don't care if you're crazy. They're not going to give you medication. They're going to put you in solitary because they treat mental illness as a disciplinary problem, not as an illness. And so you're not going to get any better. And when you come out, you're going to be angry, and you're going to be violent, and you're going to repeat, and you're going to go right back in again. So if you can save yourself, turn around now.
what exactly are your thoughts on rehabilitation? Do you feel like the prison system, the justice system, judicial system, however you want to put it, do you feel that does its job as far as rehabilitating people? And if you don't feel that, then because I don't feel it either, I'll be honest with you. What do you feel they could do better to make rehabilitation actually a thing instead of just a word?
Yeah, you know, it's a word that they should be embarrassed that they use. There is no such thing as rehabilitation. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe you might possibly get a GED if you don't have a high school diploma. That's it. That's the end of the road. You know, time was where you could learn plumbing, electrical work, small engine repair, whatever.
They offered that in the state system.
In the state system, they do. In the federal system, there's literally nothing. They're not trying to rehabilitate you. They don't care about you. They don't care what you do when you get home. So they give you nothing. Well, if you're a drug dealer from the hood and the only thing you know in your life is dealing drugs and you have no skill, you have no job, you can barely read, what are you going to do to make money? You're going to sell drugs again. Well, that's the government's fault as far as I'm concerned, because they've had you for all this time. They talk about it being rehabilitative, right? It's supposed to be an institution, not a prison, right? It's a correctional institution. They're not correcting anything. It's just punishment. Now, if they were honest about it and said, look, this is a prison, we're going to punish you, you're going to get screwed here, you're not going to learn anything, I'd say, okay, well, you know, that's the system that we have.
They're doing their jobs. I know we're jumping ship completely here, but what was it like for you actually getting released? Like, what was your last day in prison like?
My last day in prison was very tough, and it was very stressful, and it was because of one female, she wasn't even a guard, she was a secretary, for whatever reason, tried repeatedly to set me up.
How do you mean?
Like, I'm walking past her in the hall, and I don't even notice it. I'm not even paying any attention to her. I'm thinking, I'm getting out tomorrow, I'm trying to make my plans, and she says, "Hey, what are you looking at?" I turn around and I said, "Excuse me? What are you looking at? You're leering at me." Well, leering gets you sent to solitary.
And we have something similar to that in the state, which is, it's called reckless eyeballing, basically.
Oh, jeez.
And it pretty much means the same thing. And could you go on to explain what leering means?
Yeah, looking at somebody in a sexual way. I hadn't even noticed I was walking past her. So I turned to her, this ugly, mousy little thing, and I said, "Don't flatter yourself." "Excuse me," she says. I kept walking. "Get back here." I kept walking. It's like I turned finally and I said, "I'm not letting you set me up. I'm going home tomorrow and there's nothing you can do about it." She tried that twice that day. And one of the cops actually warned me. And I said, "Please." I said, "You know what I've done in my career? You know where I've served in my career? I can handle her."
Were you nervous at all about being released? Like how life was going to be like for you after this experience?
No, and I should have been. No, I was just so happy, so thrilled to go home and start my new life. What I did not think about and what I did not expect is that, like every released prisoner, I was going to have to deal with issues of depression and anger. You know, I thought I could just step right back into my life again. And nothing could have been further from the truth. First of all, I had 90 days of house arrest. And house arrest is you literally cannot leave the four walls of that house. Well, at least in prison, I could go out into the yard, I could exercise, I could walk around, I could, sit on a park bench and listen to the radio. You can't do any of that on house arrest. It was far more onerous being under house arrest than it was being in prison. And another thing too, I used to make really great money. I'm a professional. I have advanced degrees. I have incredible governmental experience. But I literally could not find a job anywhere. And I applied everywhere. I mean, Target and Walmart and Home Depot and the grocery store. And I couldn't get a job as a dishwasher.
That is insane.
So, like I say, I thought I could step back into my life. Instead, it looks like I'm going to step back into poverty. And until finally, I wrote a tweet. Now, when I went to prison, I had like 600 Twitter followers. When I came home from prison, I had 21,000 Twitter followers.
That's impressive. So, that's impressive. I've got 9,000, so you're killing it, John.
So I tweeted, "People, I need a job ASAP. Must be 40 hours a week." And I got a job as a fellow at a progressive think tank in Washington working on prison reform issues.
Really?
Yeah. So that led to a weekly syndicated newspaper column that runs in 220 small papers around the country.
Holy cow.
And I write a lot about prison reform and prison issues, and some on foreign policy and intelligence and stuff like that. And I'm on the speaking circuit. I speak at colleges and universities all around the country. And because I was so high profile, I've had these crazy invitations. In May, I'm going to address the German parliament, for example.
Really? So
Yeah.
where are you doing that at? Is that like in Germany?
Like in the German parliament in Berlin.
So traveling out of the country isn't going to be an issue for you?
No, actually, as soon as I got home, the Greek government hired me to help them write a new whistleblower protection law. So I made 3 trips to Greece in 2015. Because it was work-related, the judge had to approve it. It's not like I was going on vacation to the Greek islands or anything.
Right.
So I made 3 trips to Greece. I've made a couple of other trips. I testified before the Council of Europe Human Rights Committee in Strasbourg, France last year.
Wow.
And now I'm going to speak to the German Parliament. I'm going to stop in Ireland on the way back and speak to the Irish press. So overseas, I have this crazy support. There are governments, like friendly allied governments, that think that I'm a hero for what I did on human rights, even if my own government thinks I'm a criminal and a felon.
That's interesting. It's really interesting just to think of how this whole thing has transpired for you.
Because I'm a felon, same as you or any other felon, we're banned from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK.
Is that true?
Yeah, we're banned.
Son of a bitch, I didn't even know that at all.
Yeah.
Sorry, sorry Canada and Australia.
You know?
I guess I'm not coming.
What can you do? We're banned for 22 years after the completion of your paper.
So at that point, I'll probably,
You don't want to go there anyway.
I'll be angry grandpa at that point.
Right. So I can't go to those countries, and I've kind of made this ongoing joke in my columns about, I said I was decorated by the British intelligence service, but now I'm apparently so much of a threat to the British people that I'm not allowed in their country anymore. And it was because of those columns that I've had some of these invitations to go to other countries. And I've maintained from the very beginning, I'm on the wrong side of my government, but I'm on the right side of history. I did the right thing. I'll do the right thing again. And so I can't travel to a couple of places. I don't care. It was worth it.
And that brings up a good question is, do you feel remorseful for the circumstances that led to you being incarcerated?
I don't. I don't feel remorseful. I mean, I committed a crime technically, and I'm sorry for that. I confirmed the name of a former colleague of mine to a reporter. That's what I did. I confirmed his last name.
And they locked you up for that?
They locked me up for that. But that's not why I was prosecuted. I was prosecuted because I blew the whistle on an illegal program. But no, I would do it again. Somebody had to do it.
What do you think the hardest thing has been for you since being released from prison? Was it trying to find work? Was it...
Yeah, it was trying to find work. I was an adjunct professor at a university before I went to prison. And in fact, when I got arrested, they added classes to try to help me get through it because they believed I had done the right thing. But, and this is typical of all universities, there is a proviso in the charter saying that you can't work there if you're a felon. So I've lost those university teaching jobs. That's been hard. Otherwise, yeah, it's all about the job market. I've had some really great fortune in Hollywood, though, and I think this is where my future is. They say Washington is the city of second chances, right? If you're a congressman and you buggered a page or you cheated on your income taxes and you got convicted, you're gonna get a second chance. Washington's not the city of second chances for me. People walked away from me in Washington. But they walked up to me in Hollywood. Just since I've been home, I've sold 3 shows to 3 different networks. One with Oliver Stone.
Really?
One with Alec Baldwin. And I'm confident, I spent the whole week last week in Los Angeles writing. I'm confident that at least one of these shows is going to make it onto the air, and that's going to be my big comeback.
And that is actually super impressive right there.
Thank you.
To be able to come home from this experience of being locked up. And yeah,
that's a show.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a show.
Don't get me to talking about this because my question is, where's my show at?
Exactly.
After Prison Show, we've got a show as well. But I absolutely commend you for what you've done with taking forth the initiative to go and seek out these opportunities for yourself. Because one thing about coming home from being locked up that I know personally, and everyone else who has been locked up knows this as well, is it's not easy, and you are not going to make it unless you absolutely do it for yourself, however that may be, legally speaking.
That's right.
And sometimes it's going to take extraordinary measures as well, such as reaching out to Hollywood or even having Hollywood reach out to you and being able to paint this picture a lot broader with a bigger paintbrush. I'm speaking metaphorically here, but of what it is like this entire experience overall.
You're exactly right.
John, it's been a real pleasure having this opportunity to speak with you. Again, this is the biggest interview that I've done here on After Prison Show.
Pleasure's all mine, believe me.
And also, it's really inspiring to me seeing the level of success that you've reached thus far for yourself since being released.
Thank you. Anybody can do it. It's hard work. You got to get past the depression and the anger, but anybody can do it.
And what do you think is the biggest motivating factor for you moving forward in everything that you're trying to accomplish in your life?
For me, it's 2 things. I have the most supportive wife a person could possibly have. She thinks that I was screwed in this whole experience. She has stood by me from the beginning, so I've got a strong backing in my own family. And second, you know, the anger at the system, the anger at the Bureau of Prisons, the anger at these bums that were running the place has energized me. And it's forced me to keep pushing forward, whether it's writing books or creating TV shows or speaking or doing radio interviews. I remember that anger, and that's what drives me.
You have to have a motivating factor behind wanting to get your life back together. No matter what it is, something has to drive you to really want to get your life back after you've lost however much of it being locked up. And it seems like you really have that. One thing that I would like to mention as we wrap this up is it is kind of ironic to me how if we had met possibly in a previous life, I'm not really sure how this interview process would be working.
No, I think it would have.
I think these lights would be focused a lot more on me, and it probably wouldn't be me interviewing you so much as it would be you interviewing me. So it's just interesting considering the two backgrounds that we have.
Yeah.
You being a government man, me being basically just a drug dealer and a drug user. How we're able to come together right here on a very common interest and also in a very common situation as well.
You know, my experience in prison humanized so many different people for me. I was friends with the leader of the Bloods, for example. He asked me to build a website for him. He was getting out.
What did he want, like a blood website?
He wanted to do prison consulting.
Get your gang merchandise right here, your do-rags and your freaking band, your red bandana. I'm just kidding.
But I never envisioned myself as being friends with a major gang leader or, you know, a crooked congressman. My bunkie was the mayor of Cleveland. Never thought I'd be friends with people like that. And you know, I found that they're good people. The guy with the Nazi, with the swastika.
He was a great guy.
He was a great guy. He would come in and he would complain about his wife. His wife left him. His kids aren't talking to him. And then he patched it all together and he was so excited he wanted to talk to somebody. And we ended up hanging out and being friends. And I asked him one day, well, what is this? What were you thinking? And he's like, I don't know, man. I was drunk. I said, no. It took like 4 hours to do that.
You're sobered up quite.
Yeah. He's like, I don't know. I said, how the heck are you going to get a job going to an interview with this thing on your neck? So I told him, you know, they make this really heavy makeup. You can cover it up. He's like, oh, dude, thank you.
What about the guy with the fuck you on his eyelids? Like, he's going to do well out there.
Yeah, he's going to do very well. He actually was only in for another, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, and then he went on his way. I have no idea.
This guy's been locked up for a year, decides to get fuck you tattooed on his eyebrows. Unreal. But look, John, I want to go ahead and wrap this up because this is long. I know we got some really awesome stuff in here. I really hope that this isn't the last time that I get a chance to see you.
I look forward to seeing you.
I would like to have some sort of follow-up to this, especially wish you well with these endeavors that you have going on.
Thank you.
I also want to include these links to John's books down in the descriptions as well. Check out these stories because I promise you a lot of what you will read in these books is far more graphic and crazy than we could mention in this interview here on YouTube. Again, John, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, man.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.